When my boss grabbed my arm, his face was completely pale, and his knuckles were white. "Do you have any idea who you just talked to?" he whispered, his voice trembling so loud the entire glass lobby fell dead silent. Everyone in our corporate office had spent the last hour stepping right past the elderly man sitting alone in the corner, ignoring his warm smile because he couldn't speak. But as a low-level 24-year-old intern who knew sign language, I simply couldn't walk by. I stepped over, signed a friendly welcome, and offered him a warm cup of coffee. The man's eyes lit up, and he signed back a message that changed my entire life. But before I could even reply, my arrogant boss sprinted across the polished floor, looking like he'd seen a ghost. What nobody in that building realized was that this ignored guest wasn't lost at all. My name is Emily Carter, and at 24 years old, I was the quietest, most invisible intern at Apex Global Headquarters. While the senior executives strutted around in four-figure suits, barking orders into their Bluetooth earpieces, I was the girl running coffee orders, fixing jammed copiers, and arranging water glasses in executive conference rooms. I was completely unbothered by being overlooked. In fact, being practically transparent gave me a front-row seat to how people in that glass and steel skyscraper really treated each other when they thought nobody important was watching. It was a freezing Tuesday morning, and the entire 40-story building was buzzing with pure chaos. The corporate board was preparing for a multi-million-dollar merger, and every manager was running around like a headless chicken, terrified of losing their spot on the corporate ladder. Standing near the entrance was my immediate manager, Richard, a man whose arrogance was matched only by his absolute disregard for anyone he deemed beneath him. That was when the heavy glass doors opened, and an old man stepped into the warm lobby. He was dressed in a faded tweed jacket, worn leather shoes, and held a simple wooden walking cane. His hair was messy, and he looked entirely out of place amidst the sea of navy blazers and sharp ties. He approached the front desk, trying to ask the security guard a question, but instead of speaking, his hands moved in sharp, frantic gestures. He was deaf, attempting to communicate using American Sign Language. The security guard barely gave him a second glance, waving his hand dismissively. "Sir, you can't stand here blocking the turnstiles," the guard barked loudly, as if raising his voice would magically make the man hear him. Executives brushed past the old man, rolling their eyes and stepping around him like he was nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture left in the lobby. My heart sank as I watched him stand there, looking utterly vulnerable, isolated, and completely ignored by an entire room full of people. I couldn't just stand there and watch them treat him like he was invisible. Most people in that lobby didn't know a single word of sign language, but for me, it was practically my second native tongue. My grandmother was deaf, and growing up, she lived with my family. She was the person who taught me how to move my hands to speak, showing me that silence didn't mean having nothing to say. Seeing this elderly man standing completely alone in that massive, crowded lobby brought back every memory of how hard my grandmother had to fight just to be understood in a world built for hearing people. Without hesitating, I stepped away from my desk, walked over to the lobby coffee station, and poured a fresh, steaming cup into a clean ceramic mug. I walked right past the security desk, stepped around two vice presidents who were loudly arguing about their stock options, and stopped directly in front of the old man. He looked up at me with tired, anxious eyes, clearly expecting another cold brush-off or a security guard telling him to leave the premises. Instead, I set the coffee on the small table beside him, looked him right in the eye, and raised my hands. Warmly and smoothly, I signed to him. "Welcome to Apex Global. Would you like some hot coffee while you wait?" The transformation on his face was instant. The stress in his forehead completely melted away, his shoulders dropped, and his eyes lit up with profound relief. A huge, genuine smile spread across his face as his hands began to move in return. "Thank you, young lady," he signed back, his movements precise and elegant. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for someone to notice me." As I stood there exchanging smiles with the elderly gentleman, enjoying our quiet conversation in the middle of the chaotic lobby, the peaceful moment was shattered. Heavy, furious footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor. I didn't even need to look up to know who it was. The sharp, agitated breath gave him away immediately. "Emily?" Richard snapped, his voice dripping with condescension as he stormed up to us. "What on earth are you doing? I gave you tasks to finish 15 minutes ago, and instead of working, you're standing here gossiping with a lost wanderer?" He didn't even bother looking at the old man. Instead, Richard raised his voice, waving his hands around frantically like he was shooing away a stray dog. "Sir, you need to step outside. This is a private corporate building, not a homeless shelter or a public lounge. Security, get over here and escort him out." I felt a sudden rush of heat in my face. "Richard, stop. He's deaf and he's just waiting for someone," I said, stepping between my boss and the elderly visitor. "He isn't causing any trouble at all." "I don't care if he's waiting for the moon, Emily. You are an intern, and your job is to follow my orders, not host social hour for random people off the street." Richard sneered, taking a step closer to grab my arm and pull me back toward the elevator bank. The old man didn't flinch. He simply watched Richard's angry face, his eyes remarkably calm and observant. But as Richard reached out his hand, his eyes finally shifted to the old man's face, and instantly, everything changed. Richard stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he'd seen a ghost. His mouth fell half open, his eyes widened in sheer terror, and the hand that was about to grab my arm began to visibly shake. He gripped my shoulder with white knuckles, his voice dropping to a panicked, trembling whisper that vibrated through the silent lobby. "Emily, do you have any idea who you've been talking to?" I stared at Richard, completely baffled by the sudden, terrifying shift in his expression. His confidence had vanished, replaced by a raw, suffocating panic that made his forehead glisten with cold sweat. "Richard, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's just a guest who couldn't find anyone to help him." "That isn't a guest, Emily," Richard hissed under his breath, his eyes wide and fixed on the elderly man. "That's Arthur Vance, the founder of Vance Enterprises, the major shareholder of this entire corporation." My heart hit the floor. Arthur Vance was a legendary figure in the business world, a reclusive billionaire who had stepped away from daily operations years ago. His name was stamped on the building's exterior, yet almost nobody in the current administration had ever met him in person. He had built this entire empire from scratch, but because he avoided red carpets and television cameras, the younger executives in sharp suits didn't even recognize the man whose checks paid their salaries. Arthur Vance had deliberately dressed in plain, worn clothes and walked into his own headquarters unannounced. It hadn't been an accident or a wrong turn. It was a calculated test to see how his executive staff treated a human being who seemed to have nothing to offer them. And every single person in that lobby had failed miserably, except for the 24-year-old intern who knew how to sign. Richard practically tripped over his own feet as he scrambled forward, bowing his head in frantic desperation. "Mr. Vance, sir, I am so sorry. I had no idea it was you," he stammered, his voice cracking as he held out a trembling hand. "Please, allow me to escort you to the top-floor boardroom immediately. Our CEO is waiting." Arthur didn't even glance at Richard's outstretched hand. He completely ignored the sweating manager standing before him. Instead, he kept his eyes on me, raised his hands, and signed with a slight, knowing smile. "It seems your boss has finally recognized me. Shall we go upstairs together, Emily?" I looked at Arthur Vance, then at Richard, whose face was now a pale mask of horror, and nodded. "I would be honored, Mr. Vance," I signed back smoothly. Without offering another word to the trembling manager, Arthur turned toward the private executive elevators. He gestured for me to walk beside him, leaving Richard and the security guard frozen in the middle of the lobby like statues. The ride up to the 40th floor was completely silent, but it was a comfortable silence. Arthur watched the floor numbers light up, a quiet, contemplative expression on his face. When the elevator doors opened into the lavish, marble-lined boardroom suite, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The entire board of directors, along with our high-powered CEO, were gathered around a massive mahogany table, frantically preparing for the multi-million-dollar merger. The moment Arthur walked into the room, the CEO practically leaped out of his leather chair. "Mr. Vance, we were expecting you upstairs 30 minutes ago. We thought there was a delay with your driver." Arthur didn't take a seat at the head of the table. Instead, he stood near the front of the room and began moving his hands in deliberate, sharp sign language. The executives stared at him in utter confusion, whispering nervously to one another. Arthur turned to me and signed, "Emily, please translate every word I am about to say to these gentlemen." I took a deep breath, stepped to the front of the room, and cleared my throat. "Mr. Vance says," I announced, my voice echoing clearly across the boardroom, "that he was not delayed by traffic. He was waiting downstairs in the lobby, observing the true culture of this company. And what he saw was an appalling display of arrogance, coldness, and disrespect." The entire boardroom fell dead silent. The CEO looked like he'd been slapped across the face, while the rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs, exchanging panicked, confused glances. I continued translating Arthur's swift, deliberate hand gestures, feeling a surge of confidence with every sentence. "Mr. Vance says that an organization built on stepping over the vulnerable is destined to fail from the inside out." I spoke clearly, my voice ringing through the quiet room. He watched dozens of high-salaried executives pass him by without a single second glance, simply because he was not wearing a designer suit or speaking with a booming voice. Arthur's hands paused, his sharp gaze sweeping over every executive present. Then he signed his next set of instructions with undeniable authority. "As the majority shareholder," I translated, "Mr. Vance is officially freezing all merger negotiations immediately. Furthermore, he is initiating a full audit of the executive management team, starting with Richard's immediate termination for unethical conduct and workplace harassment." A collective gasp echoed across the table. Just then, Richard slipped quietly into the back of the boardroom, hoping to fix the situation, only to hear his own dismissal declared in front of the entire company leadership. He looked utterly crushed, standing pale and helpless as his years of arrogant ladder climbing collapsed in a single instant. Arthur turned to me, his expression softening as he signed his final decision. "Mr. Vance is appointing me as the lead coordinator for a new company-wide ethics and community outreach initiative, reporting directly to him with a full salary upgrade. He believes that true leadership starts with empathy, and it's time this company remembered that." Walking out of that skyscraper that afternoon, the crisp air felt completely different. In a single morning, I had gone from an invisible, 24-year-old intern who ran coffee errands to holding a pivotal leadership role in a multi-billion-dollar empire. But as I stood on the crowded sidewalk, watching the bustling city move past me, I didn't feel pride in my new title or salary. I felt a profound gratitude for the woman who had made it all possible, my grandmother. She had taught me that true strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest or wearing the most expensive clothes. It comes from the quiet ability to see people when the rest of the world chooses to look away. Over the next few months, we completely transformed the corporate culture at Apex Global headquarters. We implemented mandatory accessibility programs, established community outreach centers, and ensured that every employee, regardless of their position or background, was treated with dignity and respect. The toxic environment that Richard and his peers had built was replaced by a culture where empathy was valued above cutthroat ambition. Sometimes, a single gesture of kindness can ripple out and change an entire life. I'm curious about you who are listening to my story today. Have you ever stepped up to help someone when everyone else turned a blind eye? Comment down below where you're watching from so I can read your stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.